In the wildest turn of events, um, for the Texas offseason, Cam Newton, yes, Cam Newton has called out Steve Sarkisian. I know I'm a little bit late on it, but Cam Newton has called out Steve Sarkisian and the Texas culture. Cam Newton. All right, we discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Nissan. You thought I was going to say FanDuel, right? It's Nissan. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. All right, on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, Cam Newton has called out Steve Sarkisian and the Texas culture. It's the first segment. In the second segment, the men's basketball team a couple nights ago got a big win, right? Hopefully it's not too late. They did get a big quad one win on the road against Mississippi State, so we discussed that. What potentially could be next for this Texas basketball team, maybe even Rodney Terry. And then in the last segment, the women's basketball team, right? When you have the type of season that they had, obviously there's going to be some awards and recognition at the end of the season, and they got that. And so we're going to discuss that. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I teased this a little bit on my last episode. I had already, was kind of in the works of doing a part one and part two of comparing each position group on the football team. So part one was the offense, part two was the defense. And in the midst of that, I see Cam Newton questioning the Texas culture. And I'm like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, what even brought that about? Like I could see if he was questioning Auburn's culture or Florida's culture, but Texas, and I'm like, was Texas in the news or something? Like, what happened? So I had to wait a little bit to discuss it, and then I had to go watch the video. And so when Steve Sarkisian was on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams, this was the day that the Spurs played the Suns in the Moody Center, and KD came home. And she was interviewing Steve Sarkisian. He was talking about culture. She asked him about having a vulnerable culture, right? And the premise of what he was talking about is that culture has helped Texas win games during his tenure, right? Like having a strong culture, a vulnerable culture of young men who Steve Sarkisian said is the hardest group to get to be vulnerable, which I, probably would, agree with, right? I thought that was a very profound statement that, 18 to 22, maybe even 24-year-old men are probably the hardest group of people to get to be vulnerable. But anyways, he was talking about the culture, and the ultimate premise was that culture has helped us win games at the University of Texas. And Cam Newton was just completely turned off by this comment. So much so that he just turned it off and was like, cut the BS. Like as if Steve Sarkisian was just blowing smoke up all our whats, right? And Cam Newton's rebuttal was, Steve Sarkisian, you need to be honest. You are winning games because you are getting the best players in America. And you're getting the best players in America because you're paying them. Right? So Cam Newton's pushback was like, forget all that culture nonsense, right? Like you're in the position you're in, Sark, because you're paying players, right? And I don't think that's wrong, but I also don't think that that's what Steve Sarkisian was avoiding or trying not to say. Like, obviously, Steve Sarkisian is not going to get on an interview and say, yeah, we're in the position we're in because we're paying more than anybody. You know what I'm saying? Our checkbook is wide open. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, he's not going to say that. No coach is, but we know these programs are offering millions to these players. We know that, obviously, right? It's the NIL era. But I think, and maybe I'm giving Cam Newton the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt because he could have just taken it and been using this to farm for engagement or clicks. You never know in this era. But I don't think that Steve Sarkisian was saying that Texas is any different than any other program. I don't think that Steve Sarkisian was saying that we win with culture and not NIL at Texas, right? Like, you're talking about the program that puts Lambos outside of DKR when they host, visitors, right? Like, Texas is not shying away from telling people they got money. You know what I mean? Like, Texas is very welcoming with recruits, right? And very, I wouldn't say open about it, but it's obvious, right, that Texas is paying players, and I don't think they're trying to hide that. And nor should they, right? That's the game. If you want to win, like Steve Sarkisian always says, like, you have to adapt. The dinosaurs didn't adapt. That's why they're not here anymore. I think Steve Sarkisian was just kind of stating the obvious in college football, that this team, to have the success they've had the last 3 years, to have the turnaround they've had after a 5-7 season, after a decade of being one of the laughing stocks of college football, came from having a strong culture within the locker room. Yes, they have great players, and yes, they have paid for those players, of course, right? But I don't think Steve Sarkisian was denying that. He was just saying that Texas, he's been able to build a strong culture at the University of Texas, and the players have helped cultivate that. So I would ask Cam Newton a question, right? And I've seen all the rebuttals. People have talked about, well, Texas A&M paid for a class and it didn't work out. A lot of teams pay for players and they don't win, which is true, right? But if Texas didn't have a strong culture, do you think Arch Manning would have sat for 2 years and not played behind a quarterback he probably thought he was better than the whole time? Do you think players like Michael Taft and Jahdae Barron would forego the NFL to come back to college if Texas didn't have a strong culture? When you look at the players that have come from this program and what they represent, do they not epitomize players that have come from a strong culture, a good program? Like, I just don't, you know what I mean? Like, that's where I think it just has to be like a disconnect or a misunderstanding, where he just had to assume that Steve Sarkisian was just gloating about our culture and saying that's the reason we win. No, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a part of it. And obviously you have to have good players, and we have good players because we've paid for them. And I don't want to say that we have good players, yes, because we paid for them, but also because they want to come to the University of Texas, because it's one of the best programs in college football right now. But when you get the players on campus, you still have to mold them. You still have to develop them. You still have to coach them. Right? That is development. That is culture. There are a lot of programs that bring in really good players and nothing ever happens with them. You don't hear about any players from Texas going out there getting in trouble doing dumb stuff. And when they do, they're dismissed from the program, because that is culture. When players come to Texas, they become bigger, faster, stronger. They grow as men because we have a strong culture. And when you're in these tight games, when you're in these tough moments, NIL can't win you games. Talent can't always win you games. You have to have a strong culture of resilience and toughness to lean on in those moments. When Texas was facing a 4th and 13 against Arizona State, yes, you have two really good players in Quinn Ewers and Matthew Golden, obviously the offensive line block and all of that, But there's a culture of resilience that you lean on. And you say, yes, it's 4th and 13. Yes, our season is on the line. But we have the confidence to go out and make the play to tie this game and ultimately win it. Switching gears a little bit here, but Ohio State spent $20 million on their roster. We can say that that's why they won the championship. And in large part, it is. But if that team didn't have a strong culture, they would have folded after that Michigan game. If that Ohio State team didn't have culture, they would have folded after that Michigan game and probably lost their first playoff game. Instead, they rattled off 4 straight wins against 4 of the best teams in the country. They bounced back after losing to Michigan. They got stronger after losing to Michigan. That is culture, right? And this team, this program, for 10 years accomplished nothing. went 5-7 in 2021, and then 8-5, and then 2 playoff appearances, 2 semifinal appearances, because they have a strong culture, right? They would not have the sustained success they've had. Obviously, they haven't won a championship, but they would not have the sustained success they've had over the last 3 years. They would not be able to continue to bring in players to this program with just money, because the money is everywhere. Maybe Texas has a little bit more of it than most schools, but the money is everywhere, right? The money will get you in the door, certainly. The money will put you in a position to compete. But then the culture has to do the rest. So I don't know what got Cam Newton so pissed off about Steve Sarkisian's comments. I'm not sure. Obviously, Texas has good players, and obviously NIL is a factor in that. But Texas would not be perennially one of the best teams in the country, which they now are, if it was just about the money. They've built a hell of a culture at the University of Texas, and you would think somebody as accomplished as Cam Newton would be able to see that. Who knows? Quick word from our sponsors, and we talk about the Texas men's basketball team, right? Maybe they need a little bit more culture, I don't know. But they did get a big win on Tuesday night. Big quad 1 win against Mississippi State. Maybe it's too late, maybe it's not. Nonetheless, a big win for Texas on the road against Mississippi State. We discussed that, their NCAA tournament hopes after the break. Culture. What even is culture, right? Can you even define what culture is for you to tell a team they don't have it? All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Nissan. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts, great guys actually, are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. I thought I was supposed to say Texas, but I'm not. So just disclaimer, right? This week's Armada and clear-cut team of the week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games both years. There's no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. So take the Nissan Armada Rogue or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. I feel like I need some mouthwash. I don't have no problem giving credit where credit is due, but this is Locked On Longhorns. And I just spent a minute and a half just glazing, right, the Houston Cougars basketball team. While our basketball team is fighting for our lives, I would over here glazing the Houston Cougars and comparing them to Nissan SUVs. It's crazy. All right. Well, anyway, speaking of basketball, and I don't know what you would compare this Texas basketball team to, what Nissan vehicle you would compare them to. But they looked like an Armada on Tuesday night against Mississippi State on the road, picking up a big victory, huge victory, 87-82 in overtime. I believe that was a score. Let me look real quick. 87-82 in overtime against Mississippi State. Mississippi State was ranked on the road. It is a quad 1 victory for the Texas Longhorns, which is huge. While they are fighting for their life going into the game, they were in the first 4 out, according to Joe Lenardi in his bracketology. Not sure exactly where they are now, but they just got to take care of business, right? After the big win against Kentucky, we knew this Texas team was fighting for their lives. but they were probably going to make the tournament, right? A decent showing at the end of the season, decent showing in the SEC tournament, and they were going to find themselves in the tournament. But then they go on the road and lose to an under 500 South Carolina team. And they were South Carolina's first SEC win, right? Then they lose to Arkansas in a game they just couldn't figure out down the stretch. And then they lose to Georgia. And now it's like you go from, okay, you're probably getting, you just got to take care of business to, yeah, I don't think you're going to make it at all. And you're talking about this team has a bona fide NBA player in Trey Johnson, a lot of other talent. I mean, Trey Johnson is second in the nation in scoring, leading the SEC in scoring. This is the University of Texas, and you're talking about not making the tournament, right? And that was their reality. And if they lost to Mississippi State, you know, the conversation would have been over at that point. You know, you could talk about maybes and hopefuls. It would have been over. But just when they're about to lose you, right? Like just when you're about to give up on them, just when you're like, it's over, it's Jover, right? They go out there and they beat Mississippi State on the road. And this was a very drunk game. This was a very drunk game, man. This was, you know, they say basketball is a game of runs. Yeah, this was a game of runs for sure. Because it's like, okay, Texas comes out, scores a couple of baskets, right? And then Mississippi State jumps out to like a 12 to 13 to 4 lead. And then Texas goes on a 10 to whatever run, right? And then Mississippi State scores like 8 straight points. And then Texas comes back and scores like 10 straight points. Like it was just one team was hot, the next team was hot, you know, and it was like that the whole game, right? And Texas found a way to win at the end. You know, this game should have never gone into overtime. But you see why this team is in the position that they're in. They just make the simple things so hard. Making free throws at the end to clinch the game, right? Ball security, being able to make an inbound pass, playing defense, staying in front of your man, communicating. Like, it's just so many things that are so frustrating for this team that has so much talent, which is why they're, at least right now, presumably on the outside looking in to get in the NCAA tournament, although the win against Mississippi State was a big resume booster. And then you see a team like this with the type of scoring talent they have. Tremont Marks scoring 24 points. Trey Johnson scoring 23 points, right? You know, in overtime. So they had a little bit more time to score the ball. But, Tremont Mark making 4 threes, right? Trey Johnson making 6 threes. Then Caden Shedrick was in double figures. Arthur Kaluma was in double figures, right? You know, this team could make some noise in a one and done scenario in the SEC tournament, in the NCAA tournament. But like I said, when you have the game in your grasp and then you allow a team to steal the inbound pass and get a layup to send the game to overtime, when you get inbound passes tipped and stolen in overtime, you know, really this game came down to Texas was up 1 and a player from Mississippi State went to the free throw line and missed both of them. That's really what the game came down to. Because if he makes both of those free throws, yes, you have a Tremont Mark. Yes, you have a Trey Johnson. But would you trust our chances to have to take a shot to win the game? Not make a free throw, but have to make a field goal to win the game. Texas was very, very close to being in that position, but, you know, the Mississippi State player pissed down his leg and missed both free throws. So, you know, a good win overall for Texas. Great resilience. You know, they absolutely could have mailed it in. They could have said, oh, we're not making the tournament after losing to South Carolina, Arkansas, and Georgia, and just gone out there and laid an egg against Mississippi State. They showed some Texas fight. They won the game. Like I said, big performances from Tremont Mark and Trey Johnson. Arthur Kaluma and Caden Shedrick, huge free throws in overtime. You know, and, you know, now you just have to hope. I mean, I won't say you have to hope. You kind of control your own destiny, you know, because if you beat Oklahoma on Saturday and you go out and win a couple games in the SEC tournament, I do think that does a lot for your NCAA tournament hopes. And at the end of the day, you can say you have 4 ranked wins this season. You could have more, you know, if you're able to do it in the SEC tournament, but you have 4 ranked SEC wins, right? That's not just something to, gloss over or dismiss. So hopefully this Texas team can make the tournament. It just wouldn't feel right not seeing a player like Trey Johnson play in the NCAA tournament at all, right? Whether it's one and done, whether we get to the Sweet 16, whatever, you just got to get there, man. Like we got to see Trey Johnson in the NCAA tournament. And Texas did everything in their power to keep their hopes alive. With a big win, 87-82 in overtime against a ranked Mississippi State team on the road after losing 3 straight. They absolutely needed it, and they made the conversation interesting. I don't know what'll happen at the end of the season. I don't know what the roster will look like next year. I don't know who'll be coaching next year. But right now, they made it interesting. And they should beat Oklahoma on Saturday. Keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully they can make some noise in the SEC tournament. And the committee can find a way to put them in. And then once you get in, as we saw a couple of years ago, anything can happen. So, big win for Texas, 87-82 over Mississippi State. Take care of business on Saturday against Oklahoma, right? Quick word from our sponsors, and we talk about the Texas women's basketball team. No question that they'll be in the tournament, right? We don't have to worry about that. But a lot of accolades, coming in for this Texas basketball team, women's, and we'll discuss after a quick word from the sponsors. All right, so talking about Vic Schaefer's group, ended the season with a big win over Florida. This team had one conference loss all year. They were co-SEC champs. Once again, they beat South Carolina, but South Carolina beat us. And they were rewarded by being the number 2 seed in the SEC tournament. We're talking about a team that is in, has a realistic chance to be the number 1 overall seed in college basketball, right? This is the number 1 team in the AP poll, but yet they're the number 2 seed in the SEC tournament because of a coin flip. But either way, just a lot of accolades for this team. I mean, this team is on fire. 13 straight victories. Beating ranked teams left and right. South Carolina, Kentucky, LSU. Really looks like a championship contender. Vic Schaefer's done a hell of a job with this program. Culture. There it is again, right? You see that culture every time they go out there and play. And speaking of Vic Schaefer, he was named the SEC Coach of the Year. Right? First season in the SEC for this Texas program. Obviously he came from Mississippi State, but first season, in the SEC, just coming in. I mean, you're talking about coaches like Kim Mulkey and Don Staley, amongst others in this conference. And Vic Schaefer is the Coach of the Year. Just a hell of a job by him this season, him and his staff. And I know that, his name is on that award, but it's a lot of people that go into, him winning Coach of the Year. So big shout out to him. And how about Madison Booker, man? Madison Booker, baby KD. I saw somebody say that nobody should ever wear 35 at the University of Texas again. I agree, right? Nobody's going to wear it on the men's side, obviously, because of KD. When Madison Booker leaves this university in 2 years, we can just go ahead and just burn any 35s, right? We don't need them anymore, right? Madison Booker and KD, we can leave it at that. I mean, because my goodness, right? 16 points this year, 6.5 rebounds, 3 assists. SEC Player of the Year. So your freshman year, you win Big 12 Player of the Year. Then your sophomore year, you win SEC Player of the Year. Damn, can we move to the ACC and see what she got? I mean, come on now. But Madison Booker, man, Mississippi made, Texas pay, right? You know what I'm saying? She is just doing the damn thing. Such a fun player to watch, offensively and defensively. Really embodies, the type of basketball that Vic Schaefer wants to play, and type of, embodies the type of culture, right, that Vic Schaefer wants to set. So just so happy for, Madison Booker, and she deserved to be the SEC, Player of the Year. Jordan Lee, the freshman, made the all freshman team. So shout out to her, coming all the way from California to Texas, making a big impact in the SEC. And then Rory Harmon coming back off of that ACL, one of the best two-way players in the country, all defensive team in the SEC, right? So a huge shout out to our players and Vic Schaefer bringing in some awards. And now it's time to go out there and cut down the nets, right? It's time to go out there and, aim to win the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament. They certainly have the team to do so. A hell of a job by this program, hell of a job by the coaching staff, a hell of a job by these women who go out there and represent the University of Texas at a high level every time they step on the court. So congrats to them. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hug 'em. Peace. I was going to say something witty, but peace. Culture.